The first thing I noticed wasn't the music. It was the silence around my chair. I was sitting at a corner table in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, watching the golden bubbles dance in my glass. The room was filled with the heavy scent of expensive perfume and the soft clinking of crystal. It was the kind of polite silence that happens when people are trying to decide if someone belongs in their world. I could feel the stares of the elite guests, their eyes sliding over my simple black dress and my unstyled hair. To them, I was a ghost at the feast. I didn't have a diamond necklace or a famous last name stitched into my reputation. I was just a girl sitting alone in a sea of titans. The jazz band played softly in the background, but the tension in the air was louder than the trumpets. Every few seconds, a waiter would bypass my table, heading toward the VIP section where the real power sat. I didn't mind. I knew exactly why I was there, and I knew that within the hour, the silence of judgment would turn into the silence of absolute shock. The stage was set for a disaster they hadn't even imagined yet. My name is Adrienne Vance, and I'm 29 years old. In this room, I am considered the family failure. My father, Arthur Vance, spent his entire life building the Vance Hospitality Group into a global empire. He raised my brother, Nigel, to be his shadow and his successor. They value flash, noise, and the kind of power you can see from a mile away. I, on the other hand, chose the shadows. I spent my years studying international corporate law and high-level compliance. To my father, I was the daughter who wasted her potential on boring paperwork instead of learning how to manage luxury hotels. To Nigel, I was just a nuisance who didn't understand how the world really worked. Tonight was the 50th Anniversary Gala of the company, and more importantly, it was the night they were supposed to sign a $2.3 billion merger with Vanguard-West, a massive private equity firm. They thought this was their crowning moment, the day they would become untouchable. They had no idea that I had spent the last 6 months working as the lead compliance auditor for the very firm they were trying to join. They didn't even know I was invited. I watched from my isolated table as the ballroom glowed under the massive chandeliers. Everything was designed to scream wealth. There were champagne towers, silver trays filled with caviar, and men in bespoke suits shaking hands over deals that could buy small islands. It was a high-status environment where every smile was a transaction. I saw my father, Arthur, standing at the center of a circle of investors. He looked every bit the king of the castle, his silver hair perfectly groomed, and his chest puffed out with pride. He was laughing at a joke made by a senator, his hand resting on Nigel's shoulder. Nigel was 32 and radiated an arrogance that made my skin crawl. He was wearing a watch that cost more than a suburban house, and he moved through the crowd like he owned the air they were breathing. They were the stars of the show, and I was just a girl in the corner. I took a slow sip of my water, feeling the weight of the legal documents tucked into my slim briefcase under the table. The contrast between my quiet presence and their loud excellence was about to become the central point of the entire evening. Nigel finally spotted me. I saw the moment his eyes locked onto mine across the crowded floor. His smile didn't just fade, it twisted into something ugly. He whispered something to the 2 men standing beside him. Large, imposing guys who looked like they spent more time in the gym than in a boardroom. Nigel began walking toward me, his stride purposeful and aggressive. He didn't look like a brother coming to greet a sister. He looked like a landlord coming to evict a squatter. As he approached, the people nearby stopped talking, sensing the sudden shift in energy. Nigel stood over my table, casting a long shadow that blocked out the light from the chandeliers. He didn't offer a greeting or a smile. He simply stared down at me with pure disdain. "Adrienne?" he said, his voice dripping with mock concern that didn't reach his cold eyes. I thought I made it clear that tonight was for the upper echelon of the industry. This isn't a family dinner where you can just show up and embarrass us with your presence. You look like you're waiting for a bus, not attending the most important gala in the city's history. I didn't blink. I just looked up at him and said, "It's a public event, Nigel. Or at least it's an event for those involved in the future of the company." He laughed, a harsh, dry sound that drew even more attention. "The future of the company has nothing to do with you. You're a low-level paper pusher who couldn't even manage a gift shop." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You're an eyesore, Adrienne. People are asking who the girl in the cheap dress is. You're ruining the aesthetic of the VIP section. I'm giving you 30 seconds to get up and walk out the back door before I make this very uncomfortable for everyone involved." I saw a few socialites nearby whispering behind their silk fans. They were enjoying the show. To them, I was just a piece of social debris that Nigel was about to sweep away. I felt the heat of embarrassment crawl up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere, Nigel. I have every right to be in this room." His eyes flashed with genuine anger. He didn't like being told no, especially not by the sister he had spent a lifetime looking down upon. Nigel didn't wait for the 30 seconds to end. He snapped his fingers, and the 2 security guards stepped forward. These were men I had seen at our family estate for years, men who knew my name, but they looked at me with blank, robotic expressions. "My sister has had a bit too much to drink and is becoming a disturbance," Nigel announced loudly, ensuring the surrounding tables could hear. "Please escort her out immediately. Use the service exit." One of the guards reached down and gripped my elbow. His fingers were like iron. I felt the sharp sting of injustice as he pulled me upward. My chair scraped loudly across the polished marble floor, a harsh sound that cut through the jazz music like a knife. Everyone turned to look. I saw the pity in some eyes and the mockery in others. I was being tossed out of my own father's celebration like a common thief. Nigel stood there with his arms crossed, a look of smug triumph on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully removed the one person who didn't fit his perfect image of success. As they dragged me toward the door, the humiliation was a cold weight in my chest, but it was quickly being replaced by a burning, focused anger. Just as we reached the heavy oak doors of the ballroom, I dug my heels into the carpet. The guards paused, surprised by my sudden resistance. I turned my head back toward Nigel, who was already turning away to return to his circle of friends. "Nigel!" I called out. My voice wasn't a scream, it was clear, sharp, and carried across the quieted room. He stopped and looked back, an annoyed expression on his face. I looked him dead in the eye, ignoring the guard's grip on my arm. "Look at that watch on your wrist, Nigel," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Take a good look at it. Memorize the weight of it." He sneered. "What are you talking about, you crazy girl?" I leaned forward as much as the guards would allow. "Enjoy it," I whispered, though the silence in the room made it audible to the first 3 rows of tables. "Because what you just did, this little stunt with security, it just cost your father $2.3 billion. It's the last thing you'll ever own that costs more than a used car." A ripple of confused laughter went through the crowd, but Nigel's face went pale for just a fraction of a second before his arrogance returned. At that exact moment, the ballroom doors swung open from the outside. A woman walked in, flanked by 3 assistants carrying leather portfolios. It was Sloane Vanderbilt. In the world of private equity, Sloane was a legend. She was the lead negotiator for Vanguard-West and the woman who held the pen for the $2.3 billion check. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the security guards holding my arms. My father, Arthur, rushed forward, his face a mask of panicked hospitality. "Sloane, you're here. Please, ignore this. A small family matter. My daughter was just leaving." Sloane didn't look at my father. She didn't look at the champagne or the chandeliers. She looked directly at me, then at the guard's hand on my elbow. "Adrienne?" she asked, her voice cold and precise. "Why are you being held like a criminal? We are scheduled to begin the final conduct review in exactly 8 minutes. The guards, sensing the shift in power, immediately let go of my arms. I smoothed down my dress, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room went silent, the kind of silence that happens right before a building collapses. Nigel scrambled over, his face a chaotic mix of confusion and fear. "Sloane, there's been a mistake," he stammered, his voice an octave higher than usual. "Adrienne, she's just my sister. She isn't part of the deal. She's just a guest who is causing a scene." Sloane looked at Nigel like he was a stain on a window. "Not part of the deal?" she repeated, her voice echoing. "Mr. Vance, your firm is being vetted for a multi-billion-dollar partnership. Did you honestly think we would trust your internal numbers without an independent audit? She stepped closer to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. Adrienne Vance is the lead external compliance officer hired by Vanguard-West to authorize this merger. She is the final signature required for the funds to be released. If she is being removed from the premises, then our interest in this company is being removed with her. The gasp that went through the room was collective. My father looked like he had been struck by lightning. Nigel looked like he was about to vomit. The powerless sister was suddenly the only person in the ballroom who actually mattered. My father, Arthur, finally found his voice, though it sounded weak and aged. Adrienne? You? You work for Vanguard? Why didn't you tell us? I looked at him, seeing the man who had ignored my phone calls for 3 years because I wasn't successful enough. I tried to tell you I was moving into corporate compliance, Dad. He told me to call back when I had something interesting to say. Sloane stepped between us, her professional mask firmly in place. Arthur, this is a grave situation. Our firm has a zero-tolerance policy regarding the treatment of our representatives. Physical coercion and public harassment are red flags in any governance audit. Nigel tried to intervene again, his ego refusing to let him stay quiet. Now hold on, this is a family misunderstanding. She's my sister. I can't be penalized for how I treat my own sister. Sloane turned to him, her eyes like flint. In the eyes of the law and this contract, she is an officer of the court and a representative of Vanguard-West. You didn't treat her like a sister. You treated her like an inferior. And in doing so, you just triggered the character and conduct breach clause. I pulled my tablet out of my briefcase, the screen glowing in the dim light of the foyer. He's right, Sloane, I said, my voice steady. I drafted the character and conduct clause myself. Section 4.2 states that any act of public harassment, physical coercion, or hostile behavior by a principal member of the target firm against a Vanguard representative results in an immediate voiding of the term sheet. I looked at my father, whose eyes were wide with realization. He knew that clause. He had signed the preliminary papers weeks ago without realizing I was the one who had written the fine print. Nigel just provided 54 witnesses and a security camera feed of him ordering my physical removal, I continued. The breach isn't just a possibility, it's an objective fact. The deal is dead in the water. The silence that followed was heavy. The investors who had been circling my father earlier began to back away, their faces turning from friendly to distant. In the world of high finance, a dead deal is a contagious disease. No one wanted to be standing too close when the collapse happened. Nigel was shaking now, his face a bright, ugly red. You did this on purpose, he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. You set me up. You came here looking for a fight just to ruin me. I didn't raise my voice. I stayed perfectly calm, which only made him look more unstable. I came here to do my job, Nigel. I was sitting in a corner, minding my own business, waiting for the scheduled meeting. You were the one who couldn't handle seeing someone you deemed lesser than you in your space. You didn't fall into a trap. You built it yourself and walked right in. My father stepped forward, his hands shaking. Adrienne, please. We can fix this. Let's go to the private office. We'll apologize. We'll make it right. Think of the family name. Think of the thousands of employees. I looked at him and saw the same man who had laughed when I told him I wanted to study law instead of hospitality. The family name was fine until Nigel dragged it across the marble floor, I said, and they deserve a leadership that doesn't use security guards to bully people. I didn't wait for a response. I pulled out my phone and hit a speed dial button. I put it on speaker so the entire immediate circle could hear. Julian? It's Adrienne. I'm at the St. Regis. A deep, professional voice came through the speakers. Go ahead, Adrienne. Is the audit complete? I looked at Nigel, who was staring at the phone like it was a ticking bomb. The audit is complete. I am triggering the red flag protocol for the Vanguard-West and Arthur Group merger. Hostile environment, physical interference with a lead officer, and a total breakdown of executive governance. I have the footage and the witnesses. Close the file and notify the board. There was a brief pause on the other end. Copy that, Adrienne. The file is being marked as terminated for cause. I'll notify the managing partners immediately. Get out of there. We'll handle the rest. I hung up the phone. The $2.3 billion deal didn't just walk away, it evaporated. My father slumped against a decorative pillar, looking like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Nigel looked like he wanted to jump at me, but the guards, now terrified for their own jobs, actually stepped in front of him to keep him back. The gala didn't continue. You can't celebrate a 50th anniversary when the company's future just turned into a black hole. Within 30 minutes, the ballroom was nearly empty. The friends and partners had vanished into the night, leaving behind half-eaten caviar and flat champagne. I walked out of the St. Regis alone, the cool night air hitting my face. I didn't feel happy, but I felt a profound sense of peace. I went back to my small apartment, ordered a pepperoni pizza, and turned off my phone. I knew the morning after would be the real storm. I knew that by dawn, the news would hit the wires. A $2.3 billion deal falling apart because of a family dispute is the kind of story that markets hate. It signals instability, ego, and bad management. I slept better than I had in years, knowing that for the first time in my life, I wasn't the disappointment. I was the one who held the scale, and I had found my family wanting. At 8 a.m., the world exploded. I turned on my computer and saw the Bloomberg headline, Vanguard-West pulls $2.3 billion funding from Arthur Group, citing governance failures. Beneath it, the subheadline read, Shares of Vance Hospitality drop 40% in pre-market trading. The ripple effect was instantaneous. Because my father had leveraged his existing hotels to fund the expansion that the merger was supposed to pay for, the drop in stock triggered a series of margin calls. Their empire wasn't just losing a deal. It was bleeding out. My phone was vibrating non-stop with missed calls from my father, Nigel, and 3 different law firms. I ignored them all. I sat on my balcony, drinking coffee, and watching the sun rise over the city. I thought about all the times Nigel had called me useless or told me I'd never amount to anything. I thought about how my father had forgotten my birthday 3 years in a row, but never forgot a board meeting. They had built their world on the idea that people are things to be used or discarded. They finally discarded the wrong person. The consequences were far worse than just a lost deal. By noon, reports were coming in that the Dubai Sands project, the crown jewel of my father's expansion, was being shuttered. The contractors hadn't been paid because the Vanguard money was supposed to cover the overhead. Thousands of workers were being sent home. Reputation is the only currency that matters in the high-stakes world of luxury hospitality, and the Vance name was currently worth 0. I received a frantic text from my father's assistant. Please, Adrienne. The board is meeting at 2 p.m. They are talking about liquidating the entire company. Your father is in the hospital with chest pains. My heart twinged for a second, but then I remembered the ice in his voice when he told me I didn't belong at the gala. I knew he wasn't having a heart attack. He was having a consequence attack. He was realizing that the throne he had built for Nigel was made of sand. I decided to go to the board meeting, not to save them, but to see the end of the story I had started. The boardroom was a different world from the ballroom. It was cold, functional, and smelled of stale coffee and desperation. My father was there, looking pale but stable. Nigel was there too, though he looked like he hadn't slept or showered. He was staring at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. When I walked in, the board members, men and women who had known me since I was a child, didn't look at me with disdain. They looked at me with a terrifying kind of hope. They thought I was there to fix it. My father stood up, his voice cracking. Adrienne, thank God, tell them it was a mistake. Call Vanguard, we can still save the Dubai project. I walked to the head of the table and stood there, looking at them all. I'm not here to fix a glitch, Dad. There is no glitch. The deal is dead because the culture of this company is toxic, and Nigel is the poison. I turned to the board. You're looking for a way out? There isn't one. Not as long as the people who treat their own family like garbage are in charge of billions of dollars. Just as I prepared to leave, a man I didn't recognize stood up from the back of the room. He was wearing a sharp, dark suit and had a predatory smile. Actually, Miss Vance, he said, there is a way out, but it's not going to be pleasant for your brother. I frowned. Who are you? The man stepped forward, tossing a thick folder onto the table. I'm Silas Thorne, I represent a private lending group. It seems your brother, Nigel, took out a bridge loan 6 months ago to cover some personal gambling debts and a few failed crypto investments. He used his future shares in the Vanguard merger as collateral. My head spun. I looked at Nigel, who had turned a ghostly shade of gray. Nigel? You did what? Silas laughed. Oh, it gets better. Since the merger collapsed, the loan is now due in full. If he doesn't pay by Friday, my group seizes his entire stake in the Vance Hospitality Group, which, at current market prices, means we effectively own 30% of this company. We're moving to liquidate the assets immediately. The room erupted into chaos. The board members were screaming at Nigel, who was backing into a corner like a trapped animal. My father looked like he was actually going to have a heart attack this time. I looked at Silas Thorne and realized that Nigel hadn't just lost a deal. He had invited a shark into the house. How much is the debt, Silas? I asked. With interest and penalties for the breach? 180 million, Silas replied, checking his watch. A drop in the bucket of a $2 billion deal, but a death sentence for a company with no cash flow and a crashing stock. Nigel finally broke. I was going to pay it back. The merger was a sure thing. Adrienne, you have to help me. Talk to Thorne. Talk to Vanguard. I looked at my brother and felt nothing but a deep, cold pity. He had risked everything. The company, the employees, the family legacy, to cover his own failures. And he had done it while pretending to be the smartest man in the room. I took a deep breath and looked at the folder Thorne had provided. As I flipped through the pages, my legal training kicked in. I saw the signatures, the dates, and the terms. Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the final page, there was a personal guarantee. It didn't just have Nigel's signature, it had mine. I stared at the elegant script of my name, a perfect imitation of my handwriting. I hadn't signed this. I hadn't even known about the loan. Nigel, I said, my voice barely a whisper, did you forge my signature on a $180 million loan guarantee? The room went dead silent. Nigel wouldn't look at me. He was staring at his expensive shoes. I needed a second guarantor from the family, he muttered. You were the only one with a clean credit rating and a legal background. I thought it wouldn't matter. I thought the deal would close, and no one would ever know. My father let out a choked sound of horror. Forging a signature on a federal loan document wasn't just a mistake, it was a felony. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a strange, icy clarity settle over me. Nigel, I said, you didn't just ruin the company. You handed me the keys to your prison cell. I turned to Silas Thorne. Mr. Thorne, this guarantee is a forgery. I can prove it within the hour with a forensic handwriting expert. That makes this entire loan contract voidable for fraud. Silas smirked. Maybe, but that takes years in court. In the meantime, the company goes bankrupt, the stock hits zero, and your father loses everything. Do you really want to spend 5 years in court while your family ends up on the street? I looked at my father, who was weeping silently into his hands. Then I looked at the board members. They were terrified. I realized that I was the only person in the room with any leverage left. I had the morality breach from the gala, the forgery from the loan, and my standing with Vanguard. I wasn't just the sister anymore. I was the judge, the jury, and the only possible executioner. I have a counterproposal, I said, my voice echoing in the silent boardroom. Mr. Thorne, I've been quietly building a holding company with some partners from my law firm. We have the liquidity to buy out Nigel's debt at a discount, say $80 million, provided you walk away right now. Silas narrowed his eyes. 80 million? I'm owed double that. I stepped closer to him. You're owed nothing if I report the forgery to the FBI tonight. You'll be tied up in an investigation for a decade. Take the 80 million, get your principal back, and move on to your next victim. Silas looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. Fine, 80 million, wire transfer by midnight. I turned to the board. And here is my condition for the board. I will provide the liquidity to save the company and reopen negotiations with Vanguard under my new holding firm. But Arthur Vance resigns as CEO immediately. And Nigel Vance is stripped of all shares, all titles, and is barred from every Vance property for life. Effective 10 minutes ago. Nigel started to scream, a high-pitched, desperate sound. You can't do this, Dad, tell her. It's my birthright. My father looked up, his eyes red and hollow. He looked at Nigel, then he looked at me. For the first time in my life, he really saw me. He saw the strength, the precision, and the power that he had ignored for 29 years. He looked at Nigel, the son who had lied, forged, and bullied. And then he looked at the daughter who was standing in the ruins, holding the only shovel. "Sign it, Nigel," my father whispered. "Sign the resignation, or I'll be the one to call the police about the forgery." Nigel collapsed into his chair, his spirit finally broken. He signed the papers with a trembling hand, the pen scratching against the paper in the silent room. He wasn't the CEO's son anymore. He was just a man who had tried to play a game he didn't understand and lost everything. The price of admission had finally been collected. 10 minutes later, I watched from the boardroom window as Nigel was escorted out of the building. He was carrying a small cardboard box with his desk items. He was flanked by the same 2 security guards who had removed me from the gala 48 hours ago. They didn't look at him with respect. They looked at him with the same blank indifference they had shown me. I watched him walk to the curb and wait for a taxi, his expensive suit looking wrinkled and cheap in the afternoon sun. He didn't have a driver anymore, he didn't have a title, he didn't even have a home, as the board had voted to reclaim his company-owned penthouse. I turned back to the room and saw my father standing there. "Adrienne," he said, I don't know what to say." I picked up my briefcase. "Don't say anything, Dad. Just be ready for the transition meeting at 9. I have a company to rebuild, and I don't have time for apologies." By the end of the week, I was sitting in the CEO's office on the top floor of the Vance Tower. The view was incredible. The whole city stretched out like a map. I had spent the morning on the phone with Sloan Vanderbilt. With Nigel and my father out of the way, Vanguard-West had agreed to return to the table. The $2.3 billion deal was back on, but this time, the terms were different. The company was now a subsidiary of my holding firm. I had saved the jobs of 5,000 people and restored the family legacy, but on my own terms. I looked at the small photo on my desk. It was a picture of me on my graduation day, standing alone because my family was too busy to attend. I realized then that I hadn't needed their approval to be powerful. I just needed to wait for them to prove how weak they really were. Respect isn't a courtesy you give to people because of their last name. It's the price of admission to the world of the living. And I had finally paid my way in full. If you were in Adrienne's shoes, would you have saved the company and your father? Or would you have walked away and let the whole empire crumble as final proof of their failure? Did she go too easy on Nigel? Let's talk in the comments. If you live for stories where the underestimated genius finally takes the throne and the arrogant elite lose it all, you're in the right place. Click the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.